Good evening, everybody. First of all, hopefully everyone can hear me. Shout if you can't, but I think I'm loud enough, so we should be okay. Most importantly, welcome this evening to Chartered Accountants Ireland Better Balance Network Groups Beyond Boundaries, an intersectional look at diversity and inclusion event. And that's the hard part over, because that was a lot of words in a very short space of time. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rosemary Keogh. I recently joined the Institute as Chief Executive Officer, and this is actually my first event for any of the networks, so really, really delighted to be here. And I think particularly for this event, diversity and inclusion is something that I have always been very passionate about, both personally and professionally. I was just thinking today about, my life's journey and different things that happen along the way. When I was about 9 years old, I took it upon myself to write to the then Archbishop of Dublin to ask him or demand to know why girls could not be altar boys. So I've been fighting the fight for quite a while. The answer was kind of a short, because you're a girl. There were more words, but that was the general essence of it. So I've always had, I don't know, just sort of an innate something in me about the importance of equality, the importance of diversity, the importance of inclusion. Some of you know that I worked for quite a period of time as Chief Executive of the Irish Wheelchair Association and would have done a huge amount of work advocating for disabled people, both at, I suppose, government policy level, but also in terms of society. And I learned an awful lot during that period about the discrimination that a lot of people in our societies face. And my learnings came from talking to people. And for me, that's the biggest piece when we want to understand the different challenges that different people in our world are dealing with. The way to understand them actually is not to talk to them, it's to listen to them. As a leader and as leaders, and I know we've got a lot of people in the room who are leaders, we have a huge responsibility around ensuring that we have a truly diverse, inclusive society, and that we create those environments where we work. And for me, the real essence of inclusion is creating that space where people truly feel like they belong. And it's not an easy thing to do, and we do all have to work at it. I was talking to Mary earlier on about, the changes that we're seeing, particularly in the US, how a lot of EDI programs are being defunded. We live in a world of disinformation, misinformation. Hate speech seems to be, growing on a daily basis. And there seems to be a courage around discrimination, which personally I find really, really frightening. We're very fortunate to live in a country that is far from perfect in this space. But I think we're slowly trying to move societally in the right direction. Notwithstanding, again, we're hearing louder voices of discrimination on a daily basis. As leaders, we have a role and a responsibility to call out falsehoods when we hear them, to call out discrimination, and to call out microaggressions, whether they are in our daily life, in our workplaces, or in the larger society where we operate with our families, with our friends, because it's only by doing that we can create the truly inclusive society that we all want to live in. I'm not going to say much more tonight. Tonight is not about me. I really just wanted to kind of set that scene. We're really honoured to have a fantastic panel here with us this evening. So I'm going to hand over to Conor now, who's going to introduce our panellists, and really looking forward to hearing the conversation. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Rosemary. Brilliant to have CEO of Chartered Accountants here supporting us, and it's really excellent work.
And really appreciate about the calling it. I think it's really important. And I think it leads in nicely to what we're about to talk about tonight. So my name is Conor Hudson. I am the chair of the Balance Committee, the Chartered Accountants LGBTQ plus networking group. And tonight we're going to be talking about Beyond Boundaries, so our intersectional look at diversity. And we're going to explore maybe the differences that each of us have, that the different intersectionalities that come across, and how workplaces can evolve to kind of reflect those complexities. So my panel here. So thanks a lot for joining us. So I'll just do a quick introduction. And actually, if I had went through your suits, CVs, we'd be here all night. So first of all, we have Dr. Mary Keogh, and Mary is the Advocacy Director at the CBM Disability or Global Disability Inclusion, and she is the current current chair of the International Disability and Development Consortium. Mary's also an accredited mediator as well. So welcome, Mary.
Thanks.
And then we have Mark Scully. Mark is the founder of Braver Coaching and Consultancy, which specializes in executive coaching and neurodiversity consultancy. Better get that right. So Mark is a barrister and a chartered accountant and a chartered tax advisor as well. And then we have Jamie Dower. Jamie is a chartered accountant as well and executive director with EY, and Jamie is leading the audit quality program there as well. And Jamie is also the co-chair of the Unity EY Unity network also. So welcome everyone. So thank you for joining. So before we kick off, I think we're maybe going to talk for 40, 50 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please ask them at the end. So everyone, like what Rosemary was saying there, I kind of want, before we get into intersectionality, I kind of want to take it back a step and just talk about the current climate in DEI and what's happening at the moment, and kind of just check in with you and see how you're feeling, kind of either from professional or personal point of view with the climate at the moment. And actually, I might start with Mark, because you have started a business in the D&I space recently. So is it a good time to be working in D&I?
Oh yeah, that's a loaded question. So it's kind of interesting because you see a lot of commentary online about the pullback from DEI, particularly coming out of the US. Okay, so the Trump administration has really exerted their political power to really make DEI kind of non-applicable in the US. Now that has fed over into Ireland with some American multinationals here. Some have kind of pulled back, some have doubled down and said, no, we're not going to go with that. What I would say though is that when we're looking at that, we're saying, oh, DEI's pulled back. We have to remember as well, guys, American companies were way out ahead of us, as DEI went. So even when some of them are pulling back, they're still ahead of a lot of Irish domestic companies. Okay, some Irish domestic companies aren't even off the mark as regards some DEI efforts. Now we're seeing a lot of that come to the fore now. A lot of, let's say, gender pay gap reporting that's now impacting much smaller businesses. So, like it or not, they're going to have to get with the program a bit. But what I'm seeing I'll hurry up. What I'm seeing from the DEI perspective, and I saw it earlier this year, is they say, oh yeah, Trump's impact on DEI. And I was saying, yeah, it's not his rhetoric that's impacting DEI, it's the tariffs. It's the impact that economic circumstances and the fear of economic uncertainty and recession putting on business is having on DEI. Businesses are cutting back and saying, we have to circle the wagons here. We are not going to incur additional costs here on something until we know what the economy is going to look like. So we just don't know where things are going to go. So that's been the biggest obstacle I saw. Certainly when the tariffs got announced, there was about a period there, about 3 months, where I saw everything tighten up in a big, big way. And I think, probably leading to a point I'm going to make later on, is as DEI practitioners, now more than ever is the time where we have to be able to go to business and say, this is how DEI is good for business. We can actually measure it and give you something that says this is actually how it hits your bottom line and how it's actually an effective intervention. Because, like it or not, economies go in cycles. There's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times. And we are eventually going to head into a bad time sooner or later. And by the time we get there, us as DEI practitioners have to be able to say to people, you cannot cut costs on DEI, because if you do, this will be the impact on your business, this will be the impact on your people, and this is why it will be a bad decision for you to do that. But if we're not prepared to do that when that time comes, and we can't give them that data, businesses are going to say, we can't justify the costs here, we're going to cut it off. So that's the onus really is on us. So whereas DEI at the moment, yeah, we're fighting the good fight, but I think we have to do more as practitioners to get the data to show why it benefits business.
It's up the business case, and it's a good point. I never kind of thought of it from a cost point of view, but that makes absolutely sense. And Mary, from your experience kind of on the development side, like obviously the last couple of months, I can imagine have been huge in terms of funding and the change.
Yeah. So, I mean, January, we think even where we are now, September, the past that 9 months, particularly with, so UN, and of course, we don't all to be talking about the US administration the whole time. There is a life outside of that, but the impact of it at the moment, as Mark pointed out around the DEI in terms of tariffs. So another kind of major political decision that was made was to basically to cut development aid. So that was a decision that was made through the Department of Government Efficiency to put a term on it. And it was made overnight. So it was, and the impact of that, I had major, I can speak to a few of the impacts. They're still playing themselves out at the moment, but I'm a chair of what's called the International Disability and Development Consortium, and we have a regular meeting, a yearly meeting, where we bring together INGOs, which is international NGOs, also organizations of persons with disabilities and other allies, to talk about our work. And we had a big project or a big conference planned around talking about how do we shift power to the countries that we all work in, which would be all lower income countries. And overnight, the decision was made, and within our network, at least, I think, 30 to 40% of our members were impacted with their budgets. So, the word velocity I heard mentioned recently on a program I'm on, and it was just the velocity of it, that there's no way to be able to respond to that. So, and really, it was cut in two ways. One was obviously the development aid cuts, but the second one was all of the DEI programs, and they actually added in accessibility to that. So it was DEI. So basically, all of the USAID at its height would have been putting in infrastructure around accessibility. So, that just a basic example of it. So where we're at the moment is, and of course there was gag orders placed on, so agencies and organizations couldn't say anything. But what, and we thought maybe, okay, let's see what type of political power, so people power can be used to try and change this. It didn't change. So, and even peer-to-peer, so governments would have been kind of, trying to push. Yeah. No. So, it's just literally like a guillotine. So where it's at now is, I think it's the numbers like $80 billion has been taken out of the development aid market, to use the term. And then within that, you would have, so the US money would have been co-partnered with other countries. So basically, you have other countries who would have been putting in funding at a smaller amount, now having to either bridge the gap, which, it's a big gap to fill. So the impact is people are dying. I think I've heard, reports from a women's perspective in terms of the maternity healthcare, like there's up to, 2 to 3 plane loads of women of that amount dying per day because of no access to maternal healthcare. So, the disability DEI side of it and all of that was, how do you come together under kind of a solidarity thing about, this is actually human beings. Yeah. No matter how you want to label code or whatever you want to describe, these are people who are in need of support, and it's been removed. So it's been pretty much a pretty catastrophic year so far.
It's so shocking when actually this is down to life and death. It's crazy. And Jamie, for you, you made the brave decision a couple of years ago to transition. How has the current climate maybe impacted your journey?
I suppose it's a really fair question, and I think Mark and Mary have spoken really well about DE&I programs and what impact it may have had on that. So I suppose maybe to talk about it more personally for a minute, the piece that I find really scary coming out of it, and Mary and I were chatting about it earlier a bit, is the way it feels like it's given a license to extreme voices in our society, and it's empowered some of those voices to speak and to say some very hurtful and hateful things, and that's not and almost be able to coach those as reasonable opinions rather than actually saying what they are. And that does seem to have gotten almost acceptable, certainly in some jurisdictions. And I feel a bit that there are people who would like that to happen here too. So that's something that I do worry about, whether you're going to travel to other countries or indeed to see it creeping into the public sphere here. And I think it's good to see that businesses and the government sphere here are not buying into that yet. And hopefully we'll continue like that, because it's a trying time, right?
Free speech is acceptable, and it's
just to piggyback on that point. I think it's saying the government obviously is on hopefully on the right side of this.
Yeah.
They could be doing more, because the government has failed to fully transpose the hate crime directive in. So they amended the hate crime legislation last year, which added in the bill, the hate crime elements to existing crimes. But when it came to hate speech, they didn't transpose that into law. So they're actually in breach of their obligations under EU law under that transposition right now. So there's more that they could be doing, but politically they stepped back from that because it wasn't.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of controversy about. And kind of just moving into intersectionality and the topic, Mary, I know that this is kind of maybe an area that you have research on, but can you just maybe give us like a brief what your understanding of intersectionality would be?
That's really interesting. So, actually interesting, because my PhD is all around intersectionality, and that was done back in 2010, and no one knew what intersectionality was then. I remember my husband saying to me at one stage, I heard someone say the word intersectionality in the street, like it was back in 2013, and he'd only heard it from me at that stage. But of course, I'd heard it from many other kind of academic thinkers of this. I think it started off academic, so I think it was really a very academic piece. It came through legal theory, it came through cases that were taken by Black women who were seen to be who were proving the case around discrimination. On the basis that basically they hadn't been able to advance into a management phase. So then they ended up being basically through redundancy package being let go. And they were kind of arguing the case that, we didn't have the opportunity for this because of systems and structures. So where it's at now, I think it's very mainstream. So I think it's very positive that it's mainstream, because I think it helps us try to look at people through more than one lens. And really tries to understand kind of the whole part of the human being, rather than just what we might see, or what one person may identify. Because we have different identities that we use in different contexts. So I think the intersectionality piece is trying to, and people have a general thing about filling people into boxes and having the assumptions, so they don't really. I think out of fear, or out of sometimes, just don't know how to respond when that assumption doesn't come through, or the box doesn't fit, or the label doesn't fit. So I think that's been a real positive side of intersectionality. So to me, it means kind of opening up more about who we are as kind of human beings, kind of creating a curiosity. Yeah.
We were just saying beforehand, like people, we love putting labels, but like people struggle putting more. You can't be more than one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Copy list.
And Mark, are you seeing in your work? Are you seeing intersectionality considered at the moment?
Yeah. So, bit of background for the people in the room. So, I got into neurodiversity consulting because I was diagnosed autistic back in 2021. That opened my eyes to everything I was looking online, but neurodiversity was all happening in the UK, and I was like, this is amazing. Why isn't it happening in Ireland? And that's why I came here. So when I'm speaking to people in organizations now and everything that I do, it's very funny. Like even myself, like I have to get over my own internal biases. I do that, and a big part of me see it in the neurodiversity community is co-occurring conditions. I shouldn't say co-occurring conditions, co-occurring neurodivergences. And we often see, autism and ADHD, and there's a lot of people now describe themselves as ADHD. And a part of me, myself, was saying, lads, come on. I was like, come on, pick a lane. I was like, I saw statistics out there that 50 to 70% of autistic people also have ADHD. And I was like, no, that can't be right. I looked into the science and research, dug deep into it, confronted my own biases. The research stacks up. you know? So even part of me, and like I see it a lot with people as well, we were talking about this beforehand, in Ireland, we're finally becoming able to, you know, interact with people who are different from ourselves because they are gay, they're trans, they're disabled, they're autistic, they're women. But we're still finding it difficult, I think, to stack up with someone who has more than one. If you are an autistic woman, if you are a disabled trans person, if you have multiple disabilities, you know, I think in Ireland we're still finding it that you can't be more than one thing, cop on, and it's a very Irish reaction, I think. And I think that's the point, is that one, if we fall into this risk, and I see businesses do this when I'm talking to them about neurodiversity, being like, okay, if an autistic person comes to me, how do I deal with them? You know, like, give me the manual. What do I do? And I was like, that's completely the wrong approach. It's like I'm autistic. I've gone back to college to study autism. I'm an expert in only one person's autism, and that's my own. If someone comes to me and says they're autistic, I have absolutely no idea what that means to them. It's literally the start of the conversation. So, and it's the same with intersectionality. If they are autistic, ADHD, gay, woman from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background, all of the characteristics that we normally put into kind of this, you know, intersectional lens, park that to one side. You just have to talk to the person in front of you, you know, and you have to find out what that means to them. And the last thing I'd say about the intersectionality piece is we have to understand the impact that intersectional identity has. And from the neurodiversity perspective, like, you know, if you come from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background, you're statistically more likely to have ADHD. If you are someone who's gone to prison, the prison population is 25% ADHD. Now, that's not because people with ADHD are more likely to go to prison. It's because people with ADHD are more likely to have been failed by the system and found themselves in the pipeline that brings them into the prison system. If you are a woman, you are more likely to have more severe symptoms associated with menopause, perimenopause periods that come from being autistic or ADHD. It's there, and the science stacks up. So it's that understanding of how these things tie together sometimes is important, and understanding that, you know, this impacts people in different ways.
Yeah, and it's very kind of like it's looking at the human and just letting your guard down and being open with the person as well, rather than just seeing them as a label or putting it into a box. And Jamie, you are obviously working, you said you work in EY, which is quite a large organization in Ireland and massive globally. Do you see, maybe EY could be a good barometer of large organizations? Are you seeing intersectionality considered, like in the approach to diversity and inclusion, or even in workplace culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that we're very focused on, certainly amongst the various different employee resource groups we have, whether it's Unity or Ability Network and so on. It's just to see how we can work together and to actually bring different experiences together. And you've made the point about both about listening to people, that's what's really key here, is people's own lived experience and understanding that. And I think hopefully we can feed that into workplace culture as well, because I think, to feed a little bit off Mark's point, it's about sometimes putting people into one box. It almost makes people feel good about themselves because they're like, we can solve this. You know, we know this person is this. If we can solve that, we'll solve it for every person who's like that, and you won't. And I mean, EY, and obviously any views I have tonight are entirely my own. You know, have been absolutely exceptional with me throughout my journey. But I was very clear from day one that my journey was my journey. It was not a how-to manual to deal with transitioning at work. Is there going to be commonalities across different people's journeys? Absolutely. But if you have someone who's arrived in Ireland at 20 years of age, is a person of colour from a very different background, their journey is going to be very different to mine.
Yeah.
And the ways that my journey worked is not going to be the same. And I think that's the piece that we need to get across, is everyone's journey is unique. People have unique factors that have put them in the positions they're in. And it's only by listening to them, talking to them, and understanding that we can build a truly inclusive workspace. And I think the piece that is missing, and it's like your return on investment comments, right, is that if you actually get this right, it helps everyone.
Yeah.
And that's the bit that we need to really get across.
It's like the rising tide lifts all. And it's a really good point about how you're not the expert on transitioning, and everyone's journey is different. Like, what can the employers do then? Is it down to policy? It's a bit more than policy, isn't it?
It's a bit more than policy, and I mean, I think there's a couple of important things. One is to listen to people. I mean, I was very privileged, and not to use that word lightly. It's actually in the loaded way. It's intended to be able to work with developing the transitioning of work guidelines that we had, but to be able to make sure that there were guidelines in place that says, this is what's right, to be able to make sure you have the right language around people, and ultimately to make it clear that there is no acceptance of, bad behavior is bad behavior. You have to deal with the person in front of you. And I think it's only by listening to people in the community, and whether that's the LGBTQ plus community, whether it's disabled people, whether it's neurodiverse people, you have to talk to the people themselves to say what's actually going to work. And that's what I thought was key for me is I was listening to, I was able to stretch out what I thought was going to work, but making it very clear all along, these are some things you have to have in place. But around other people coming through the same journey, it's not going to work as one size fits all, but there are some commonalities that you have to take and make account of.
Yeah. And Mary, maybe just from your experience, obviously I can imagine you're an expert on policy. But like, do you see, like, I guess sometimes the risk of having policy is maybe that we're putting people into boxes. Like, if you think from a disability point of view, you're kind of just thinking of that person in one thing and nothing else.
Yeah, no, actually, my PhD research looked at that in terms of how donor governments. So I looked at actually USAID, which I think that's probably why it's even sadder that USAID are gone. When I actually did my PhD research and spent time with them, and you would have the funding streams for gender, and you'd have the funding streams for HIV/AIDS, and you'd have the funding streams for youth, and then you'd have a funding stream for disability. But actually, they'd be all quite separate. So they'd be various different departments. They would be there was a lot more movement towards crossover, and that has started to change. So policy can only do so much. I mean, I think policies are great, but they're usually on a shelf.
Yeah.
So it's really the practice, and I mean, the practice is messy. I think one of the things around kind of working in diversity and inclusion is if you think it's easy, well, actually, it's not. So, and sometimes we go through the phase of saying, trying to encourage people to do it and to cajole people into it. Actually, it doesn't, but it does actually. It takes time and investment. You have to spend the time with people to bring people together to understand the different perspectives. So, the siloing piece is kind of a natural default thing I think we all fall into, and I fall into as well. I mean, I think when we look at cross movements, how, the disability movement, the gay, trans movement work together, even within our own movements, there's discrimination and there's silos, and, I think, to speak to Mark's point around the ADHD and neurodivergent, I've been in kind of circumstances where people are going, they're getting far more attention than we're getting. I was at a conference in Brazil about many years ago with a group of disabled women. It was a feminist conference, and there was quite a lot of trans women coming to attending. And they were like, when is it our turn? Like, the disabled women were going, when is it our turn to be on the stage talking? And it's just that competitive piece. I think we have to be really honest about that. It's because it's limited resources. Yeah. It's limited time that we're always competing for. So it's messy, but we have to work our way through it. And I think that's how breaking the silos down takes a lot of time and a lot of effort.
Yeah. And Mark, kind of like from neurodiversity point of view, like, is there risks in the workplace when neurodiversity is just considered as its own silo?
It's a good question. I would say yes, because it's going back to the point you said there, because if you have anything considered as its own silo, you're immediately saying we're doing this because we're putting a label on the person. Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, it's a presumption that, here's this issue we have to tackle. And what I'm finding a big issue actually is that a lot of organizations see this as the end goal being disclosure. which is not what the end goal should be for any organization. I talk to organizations, they're like, okay, but we know X number of people in our organization have disclosed as autistic or ADHD or anything like that. We want that to get that to Y. And I'm saying, what? Why do you need people to disclose? Okay. The end goal here is not for people to disclose. The end goal here is for your people to feel that they can get the supports they need in order to be able to work effectively. For some people, hopefully that's as simple as going to the manager and being like, look, I'd love to just change some of the ways we're working. And you would hope that if you have a manager who is adaptable and flexible and has good management training, to just be like, actually, yeah, that sounds sensible. Happy to do that. Fair enough. There are some pretty big adjustments that do require, a substantial change of working practice, a big money outlay that like, okay, a disclosure will get me into the sphere where I'm like, that's a reasonable accommodation. I need that to be provided. But the end goal is always getting the people the supports they need. And like at the end of the day, the very common phrase here, if anyone's going from this space, they know the phrase, if you met one autistic person, you met one autistic person. What does that mean? It means that you cannot generalize what a neurodivergent person is going to look like just because you met one person with that particular neurotype or label. So you need to just, deal with the person in front of them. And I'm sorry, I was actually just at a business meeting earlier today, and maybe I'm cutting across my own business on this, but like, I've had people bring me in and say, like, we want to do neurodiversity training for our managers. I firmly believe training for managers is the most important thing you can do. But I said to them, okay, that's great, guys. Have they had management training yet? Do they no, genuinely. I was like, do they know how to give performance feedback? Do they know how to have a conversation with their employees? Do they know how to actually sit down with them and figure out, okay, how do I, adapt to this employee's needs? That is nothing to do with neurodiversity, but I think that is the foundation of being able for colleagues to work together who are from, who think differently. And that's what neurodiversity is. Neurodiversity is just saying that we all think differently, and so just going back to that point is, when people treat neurodiversity in silos, they think about everything in the terms of neurodiversity when they should just be thinking of how do I get people who think differently able to work together more effectively.
Just thinking back to what you said about companies looking for disclosure, I'm going to kind of put that back to you and to Mary and Jamie as well. How can companies measure it? How can they measure that their employees feel comfortable, feel open? Because it's quite hard.
It's $1 million question.
It is, absolutely.
You want to take it first?
No.
First.
I suppose there's a couple of things there. One is how much is it fair to ask, and how much is it appropriate to ask, and to acknowledge that people don't have to disclose.
Yeah.
And I think this was kind of back to the point I was trying to get at earlier, is the piece around the rising tide, as you said, is that if you can, there is a certain amount of accommodations which will make life easier for trans people around bathrooms. They shouldn't impact anyone else. There's a certain type of accommodations, maybe around accessibility, around desks and how they work, which will make it easier for disabled people. May actually make it easier, but certainly shouldn't impact negatively on anyone else. There are maybe aspects around hybrid working or work-life balance and hours that might make it easier for a neurodiverse person and shouldn't impact on anyone else. So why can't we figure out those things and do them for everybody? And then the level of data you need becomes less, because you're like, we're actually an open and accessible workspace in as much as we can be. And then to your point, Mark, is there will be people who will have additional needs, and that will have to be discussed and some accommodation needed. So I think that should be the goal.
Yeah, and that's your organizational culture when you start to
culture, yeah.
So like the reason why we went through a whole period of kind of reasonable accommodation for quite a lot of our staff are kind of globally around the world, and it means different in different countries. Actually, when we said reasonable accommodation in one, they thought it meant housing, because like it's a very Western term. It's a American European centric term, So we have a policy in place in our organisation in CPM. We did a rollout of the policy, brought staff in, discussed it. And then there was a question that no one's coming forward. Why aren't they coming forward? And it's like, well, I kind of was saying, well, sometimes actually people, exactly that, they don't want to disclose until maybe they get themselves into a situation that's affecting their performance or it's affecting their mental health and their well-being. So it's about, it may get picked up in other ways that So then as management and as leadership, then we need to be able to say, I'm noticing, that, maybe you're overstressed or you're burnt out. Is there any particular reasons for this? And so there's not just one way to disclose. I think there's a number of ways that the system needs to pick up and have it in its processes so that it doesn't, because there's a stigma attached to disability, and particularly for people, I think, with, and I can't speak from that because I'm very visibly disabled, but for people who have invisible disabilities, not apparent, may just, go the whole way through their work life and never mention it because they also maybe haven't processed it to the extent that they think asking for help isn't failure. So it's that whole cultural piece, I think, in the organization that's really important to work on.
That point, like just hammer home culture piece. I can't tell you how important it is to have the tone from the top, like the senior leadership, like saying that this is a priority. We are investing time in our people here. Like to tell, I always come this, like a lot of my work is focused on professional services. So being my background, going back into like the legal firms and the accounting firms. And it can be difficult because we're dealing with partnerships where you have a lot of bosses there and it's hard to get that common message, but you need to have that message because ultimately, I always think that culture lives in the split second before you make a decision. And I think it lives in the situation where a manager is there deciding, oh God, we're under pressure because we're firefighting, because we're a professional services firm and we're always firefighting. And I need to decide whether I'm willing to invest that little bit of additional time now to explore that different way of working that employee said that they'd like to do, or am I actually going to default back to the way we've always done it because we need to get this piece of advice out the door ASAP because the client is banging down the door asking where it is. And then you say, what would the partner say? What will my boss say? And you need to have it in their mind, say, actually, do you know what? My boss is going to tell me that I should have actually given it the additional time. My boss has made it clear that this is going to my performance review end goals to be, to be accessible, to be inclusive. But if they feel that, actually, do you know what? I know what my boss really wants. They just want the work out the door ASAP, low time on code, and to get the fee out as quick as possible. That happens in a split second. So that's why the tone from the top matters so much, and that's why the manager training matters so much, because that's that culture lives and dies in those split seconds.
And we were kind of just talking about it beforehand, and I think it's really important. Like as a neurodivergent person, as a person with disability or part of the LGBTQ community, you don't really see someone like you in a senior management position, which I think that really you miss out on that kind of mentorship as well.
It's that old phrase, isn't it? If you can't see it, you can't be it, right? It's never been more true, right?
Yeah. So at least if you can get that manager training right, it kind of helps fill that gap slightly.
Yeah, someone actually got to me recently and said there's a charity that are looking for a neurodivergent board member from an audit background. And did I know anyone?
I'm going to secret handshake too.
I had to say no. I legitimately could not think of someone who I was at maybe at like director level that I would have been like, actually, yeah, that's the person I think you should get in touch with. But it matters so much. It matters so, and like nobody is obliged to be public about whatever their particular intersectional identity is, if it's not visible. But it really matters so much to people in the industry when they see, like the partner or director or CEO or C-suite, they got there. I can relate to that. It makes things feel possible. Because without that, then you can't see it, you can't be it.
And Mary, you just touched on invisible disabilities, and actually one of the questions I had was about invisible intersectionalities. So taking that a little bit further, so I guess the way I would define that, maybe correct me, but so if you're part of LGBTQ community and you're quite open and not talking about that, people are aware that is your identity. But maybe you are neurodivergent and you don't talk about that at all.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting. We did a piece of research in Nepal into one of the projects that we work in with persons with disabilities living in a rural community, and they preferred to be coming through another network than the disability network because the stigma that was attached to that. So, and I thought that was, I think that's it. And it is, there's a thing about, I think it's called the different masks that we wear. We can hide parts of ourselves. I could just think of it, in terms of, look, I'm very much a, kind of feminist sitting in a meeting where, being pushed back on issues around gender equality and the wider gender equality issues. Sometimes, someone will look at me and I'll come at it from it. They'll go, well, you're actually here to talk about disability issues. And well, no. And actually, I was a senior gender advisor in my organization for a while. It was quite interesting because, people will be like, well, what do you just say about gender? You're like, well, actually, if you think of intersectionality, it's about the structures and the systems that oppress people. So actually, the systems are not designed. So it is really, it's really people's, and people, I kind of, as I get older, I get a bit more maybe thinking, not everybody comes from a bad place.
Yeah.
A lot of it is around fear. A lot of it, and look, it shouldn't be our role to also make people feel comfortable. I think that's the other side of it. But we do find ourselves as involuntary ambassadors most of the time, whether we think about it or not. But that fear, it is really trying to figure out how you work with people around fear and make them feel comfortable, but also not burn yourself out. So I think you will hide identities, or you will hide parts of yourself sometimes, just to make it kind of easier. And then other times they might come to the fore. It depends on how passionate you feel about it. So yeah.
And Mark, Jamie, I guess, how can then just bring that to the next stage? Like maybe it's part of that, if trying to get people to disclose, but how can kind of leaders build awareness on those invisible intersectionalities?
I suppose they can listen right first, and I think to the point that Mark made, it's the training that this should be at the core of all training for all managers, is that they can recognize and that they can listen and they can understand and address and deal with the people in front of them. And it's maybe a bit for us as individuals, maybe it's a bit of the flip side of what we were talking about earlier, about the idea of we like to put people into labels because it's hard to deal with people who are, in more than one box. And maybe as individuals, there's as well a natural fear to be almost, we seem to be asking for too much. It's like, I'm in this box now and people are coping with that. I can't turn around and say I'm this as well, because then they'd be going like, well, look at her, but it's to make sure that cultural piece is there, that there's a culture of listening and awareness and just genuine empathy, because that's all this is. It's nothing more or less than that. It's about, we're all human beings. Let's
and vulnerability. I think, disability, part of the disability movement is here, say the word disability and vulnerable together, people are like, I can't do that because it reinforces charge model, where, ultimately, I think if you've got leadership who's very happy and comfortable to be vulnerable. So I think the problem is we've had this certainty model. I think we were just speaking there earlier, Rosemary, about we're in a world of absolute uncertainty at the moment. So anybody who says they have the answer is doesn't have the answer. So I think we need to, that kind of leadership piece needs to be someone who is absolutely the empathy piece, but also the piece to go, I don't know the answer. Yeah. So how do we actually work together to problem solve this? And we may not get this fully right. Because there is a side where you can go very extremist, to use a term, around rights, and you can get very adversarial. And there's quite a lot of, I see quite a lot of that over the years, where you're thinking there's absolutely moments when you need to take litigation, when something has happened, when somebody has been hurt or injured or moral injury. But there's other times when, I think it's probably what made me start training as a mediator, was, is there somewhere we can get in the middle here where we can start having those dialogues and getting people to talk to each other, rather than taking just such zero-sum positions. And I think that just translates into everything in life at the moment. We're in a zero-sum world. So, that's why diversity, equality, and inclusion is really important, to the challenge of that.
Yeah.
I just come back on the point about the invisible intersections, I suppose, like how do leaders make themselves aware of that. There's an infinite number of permutations by which a person's identities can overlap. Okay, so a leader cannot possibly say, how would I interact with someone who's got all these intersectional identities, because it's infinite. They don't know. So what can they do? They can create an environment in the workplace where people feel safe, that if they were to say it to their manager that they have a particular identity, that they're not going to be scoffed at, that they're not going to be felt that, oh, they're not going to believe me, or actually they will believe me, but they're going to think I'm not competent to do the job. These types of things. That's where leadership comes in, and it kind of comes into the tone at the top point, the culture point. There isn't any snide comments, the old lads club, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, these types of comments that people would have seen around, and you're kind of like, oh, you see the corporate messaging there, but really you hear in the backroom talk, that all permeates the organization. So if you create that environment, and you can't force it, you just have to create the environment, create the conditions where eventually, after a long enough time, someone will say to a manager that they need support, that they're from some community or something like that, and people will see that and be like, wow, that worked out well for that person. Okay, that's great. Maybe I'll feel safe to do that. Then they do that. Then somebody else does that. And eventually, after time, you have that culture of openness and acceptance. But I think people are kind of more just like, no, we need to know now. We need to see results. We need to, we need to make this happen now. We need to get the metrics. And it's like, no, just create the environment and just let it, just trust that it's going to work if you do this right. And the benefits are huge.
Yeah, and it's a long-term investment, right? The comments about business case earlier on, because there is, probably always has been, but certainly quite extreme at the minute. We hear the overused phrase of a war for talent, but this is the type of workspace that you're describing is where, certainly in the next generation, that's where the best talent is going to want to work.
Yeah,
and it's creating that and having that as your public face as well as your internal face, and that being real is going to come across very quickly, and you're going to get the best people, and it's a long-term investment as well, right?
It's also a place that people are going to not want to leave.
Yeah,
that's a really important point. So my last question before we go to the Q&A to all of you, I kind of want to take it back to, I started on the current climate, and we're talking about intersectionality. So I kind of want to finish off about if organizations can bring this kind of intersectional approach, is that going to benefit the overall D&I climate at the moment in general, and then in individual organizations? I don't know.
I think yes. I mean, I think we've spoken a bit maybe about how it benefits individual organizations, but I think absolutely it should benefit the overall climate as well, because we all spend a huge portion of our time in work, and probably a commensurate portion at home. And culture is a thing that it builds, it grows in people. And if this is the culture that you work in, I think hopefully you take that away with you, because you can't fake it. So I think if this is a genuine culture, and that's genuinely the empathy that we're trying to grow, and just even to talk about it a little bit personally, I've seen it myself, both in work and in other experiences, that transgender individuals, right? It's a bit of a bogeyman at the minute. And for a lot of people, it was something that was on X or in the newspaper or somewhere else. But then they met me, and it's like, oh, well, you're okay. It's not just me. It's like there isn't anything to be scared of here. And hopefully more people start to realize that as you interact. And then that goes across all different, intersectionalities, is that, and maybe there's unspoken ones still too, whether it's, the vaguely acceptable forms of racism that we still have, particularly in Ireland, around certain immigrants from certain countries or our own ethnic minorities, is that if you've got a culture where people are actually just going to interact with people from different communities, with different backgrounds every day, they're going to walk out, and when they meet someone else, they're going to go like, well, I know something, and now I'm not scared of this person as well. So hopefully it does build, and the more companies do it, the better the public sphere becomes as well.
And Mary, if we take this intersectionality approach to D&I don't think it's going to solve the 80 million gap, but
No, but I mean, people, it is hopeless, but also I'm still hopeful. And I think my hope probably comes from other human beings. So, when you look at where we're at the moment, it seems it's a very polarized world around. But actually, I think, as Jamie said, when people meet people, and that's what we're in a world at the moment which prefers people behind screens and communicating through, social media platforms, and, rather than actually sitting having coffee together. So I think the more our movements work together. I mean, I don't represent a movement, I feel like, as being a disabled person. I'm a paid professional. I'm always careful to say that I'm not a paid disability movement person. But the movements, I think, also have to really see how to work together, because that's where there is strength. But again, there's a piece around getting people to kind of understand that human contact and human connection is really important. And yeah, I mean, I do have hope. I mean, development aid goes through crisis on a regular basis. This was a particularly significant one. But I think we have a long way to go to fight back. And there's a great Black feminist called Loretta Ross has a book called Calling In. We need to be mindful of always calling people out when actually we might need to take some time to call them in. Now, that doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable, but you find a way to call someone in that disagrees with you. So that's, and that's at a very kind of human, kind of basic level. But I think we have to start learning those skills again, because I think we've probably been doing it online for too long and not in person. Yeah, maybe.
Mark, how do you see, from neurodiversity point of view, I guess, that intersectionality, is that going to change the overall climate, or is it down to companies, like you said at the start, that are looking at the cost, or is there something else in there?
I think we want to lean to Jamie, what you said, because just my own background, obviously, I got diagnosed in 2021. So before that, I didn't have an intersectional identity. I was a cis, white, Irish male, heterosexual. I was very firmly in the most privileged bucket you could find yourself in. Now, I was struggling, I was miserable because I didn't know I was neurodivergent, but I was firmly of the view of other people just need to get on with it. I had that, biased, privileged view of, people just need to stop complaining. I mean, everyone's equal under the law. Why can't people just get on with it? And it was only when I found myself outside the bubble, then looking in, I realized, oh, wow, okay, look at all this. I can see all the struggles that neurodivergent people are facing. And then talking to other neurodivergent people, first talking to neurodivergent women, I was like, wow, neurodivergent women face a lot of issues. Then I was like, oh, wow, women face a lot of issues. And then talk to neurodivergent people from other identities. Then it brought me, my world opened up to the issues that people from so many other identities face. And I also have to credit my wife, who's a person of color as well, educating me on the struggles that she faces and sees in Ireland on a day-to-day basis. So, whoa. So that's all to say that, I think that DEI in the workplace, exactly as you said, Jamie, if we can get people out more, that people understand, oh, this is what it looks like. This is what autistic people look like, people with ADHD look like, disabled people work like. They're not scary. They're not aliens. They're people. They're just people. And we can, and that's it. And all of these preconceptions and all these scare stories I see online, that's online. This person's here in front of me and they're an amazing person and fantastic. And I think in the workplace, I think if we can make it that, particularly for neurodivergent people, because I firmly believe the best way that neurodiversity is going to impact business is showing that there's different ways of working, and that different ways of working can can work, particularly with AI, particularly with flexible working, particularly with COVID has shown that we can work in so many different ways, and that those different ways of working are going to benefit everyone. So that's going to be, I think, the greatest gift that neurodiversity is going to bring to the workplace, opening our minds to, moving away from there's only one process to do things to saying, no, there's one outcome we want, but there's multiple ways of getting there. And that's what I think neurodiversity is going to bring. And through that, then hopefully embracing that, neurodivergent people aren't aliens. Neurodivergent people are our colleagues. They're people, they're our friends. Mm. And for many people, we've known them all your life and you didn't know it. And I think, moving beyond that, then we're going to see, again, coming out to wider society, then people like, oh, I know an autistic guy in work market. Jesus, he's not actually what I thought an autistic person would be at all. Isn't that something?
It's a kind of curiosity that you only really get when you go see it in front of you. It kind of triggers something. And I hear the interesting topic about the ways of working. I think actually we could probably be here for another half hour talking about that. But I think maybe if we go to Q&A, if there's any questions for the panel.
Question, it's necessary. Do you think the legislation like the Commonwealth is doing that? Will have the
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be quite a lot of expectations around the new Accessibility Act, and I think in general, I think Ireland's got quite strong equality legislation. I think, it depends on how much it becomes like a stick to beat someone with or a carrot to encourage. So I think it really depends on the incentives. Back to that piece about how far can you push from the compliance piece? How far does compliance really push people to change their minds, or do they feel kind of, forced to do it? So therefore, so I think trying to unpack that, but I think law is important. Yeah. And I think, from a European perspective, also because it's European, it's a strong piece of legislation. It's across a number of countries. So I would have good hopes for that. I have heard some rumblings, and I'm not an expert around that because I work kind of more within more lower income countries. But I have heard people saying they're not sure if the Irish government are pushing it enough at the moment. So, and whether the focus behind it in terms of the awareness of it. Because I think that's the thing around the laws is the awareness of them. Not everybody always knows they're in existence. So you have to do a whole piece of work about educating people to understand how to use them. Yeah. But I think hopefully it'll be positive. Yeah.
I don't know if it was a question or a comment. So Mark, you briefly referenced AI. And you kind of say it could be used, for good and one thing, and it scares the hell out of me. If you think about some of the words you're using earlier, around invisible, like it's happening, we don't even know what's happening, and being vulnerable, the fact that it's kind of using historical information all the time, the endemic racism, sexism, etc. That feels like, and it's so fast as well. It feels like, never mind dealing with the humans, but then dealing with the AI. The good or bad thing, I suppose.
It's how you use it, right? I think I think we're all it's the bias which is either intentionally or unintentionally built the algorithm, right? And that's the real scary piece, and it's the level of human oversight. But as with anything else, we were already talking about this very thing before, and it can be used for good or for bad. And as I say, it's happening very, very quickly.
It's a good point that people could be influenced. I was reading about Elon Musk is involved. It's been nearly been programmed to give a more conservative response. So it really could be influencing people.
Yeah. I think we're learning how bad social media has become. I think I was listening to Tim Warner-Lee being interviewed the other day about the internet, because obviously he founded the internet, so talking about how it's become such a monetized place now, the whole piece around it, but that was set up for good. So it's probably, we need probably like health warnings or some type of warnings around social media, and probably something similar for AI. So, but of course we know the regulation for that is little or nothing. So one of the things I guess from the countries that we live in and within the European Union is that you do have regulations. So yeah, but I think AI it's being seen as, I mean, I use it sometimes, it's a productivity tool. And once it's seen as that, I think it can be a very helpful assistive tool. But yeah, the spreading of information on the social media platforms and all of the confluence of all of that together is really dangerous.
Yeah, I think just going back to the point about the bias of the information in there, I had great sport on Autism Awareness Day earlier this year on LinkedIn. And I could see all the posts that have been generated with AI because lots of them had puzzle pieces dotted all over the imagery that was generated. Now, if any people are from the autism community, they know that historically that would have been used by Autism Speaks, and the use of the puzzle piece is no longer seen as acceptable. It implies that there's something missing from the person. So that has now been for quite a while now seen as that imagery is no longer inclusive or seen as them. Some people are okay with it, but generally the community is against it. But there was a flurry of posts this year with that graphics. Why? Because all of the AI has been trained on this historic imagery that has come through. So that was interesting. On a more optimistic note, genuinely though, I am very excited to see what AI is going to be able to do for neurodivergent workers. If you imagine like the amount of working memory it takes for people, and it's a problem for like people, it's like, and it was a job that I had to do as well, sitting on this call and take the notes. That's a thing of the past now these days. AI is going to take all that away and just generate out a meeting summary for us. So that's going to be a huge release on working memory, summary agendas. If you are someone who is much more oral communicator or anything like that, you can easily generate a report and say, I need that summarized, put that into a podcast that I can listen to. Like, I'm excited by how this is going to, and we're going to move away, I think, finally from saying that the final deliverable is always going to be a 20-page report generated in Word. It is going to be something else that's going to be, we're going to see the ways in which we do things and the deliverables in outcome which we do those things come to be different. I would love if you had an AI assistant that knows your way of working, that knows the way you communicate and says, actually, I know that Mark can't do meetings longer than half an hour. I know that Mark isn't good at this time of day. I know that Mark can only do three hour-long meetings a day. I know that Mark has a standard thing that he wants agendas before meetings. I'm going to just send that out as standard to Mark's contacts to say that these are requirements for Mark's meetings. Like, I'm really, really, really excited at that prospect now. There's all GDPR and what's going to happen with all the data. There's all that's going to go. But that, I think, is going to be, and we are doom and gloom about AI a lot, but and there are massive risks and concerns. But I hold out a kind of a little glimmer of hope because it's going to be the way in which I think neurodivergent people are going to work differently. And not only that, I think many people see that and see, oh wow, they're working differently. I want to try that out. I use speech to text. I dictate. And like, here's the thing, being like, oh, you dictate. Lawyers have been doing that for years. They've been dictating their memos for years. So like, try these things out. Try out these different ways of working yourself. And you may be like, oh, that works.
It's really good. You got a good response. Is there any other questions from the meet? Oh. Okay. You can go first and then we can go see it.
It's a little bit of a contentious question, but like, just thinking that when you're trying to create an environment where you're going to get business in general, and I'm taking it down a level from legislation and policy into entities and companies. And the prize at the end of the day is for it not to actually matter because you show up in your authentic self and we all get to work, right? So, but we need to start somewhere, and I find companies are very quick to tick the boxes.
Yeah.
We've got this beautiful policy here, and many off-the-shelf sort of our policies are brilliant, but the lived experience every day is very different. I think you touched on it earlier. How close are we to making it legal and above board and without challenge to include people's management of diversity in its huge umbrella in performance management? Like, do you think we'll ever get to the point where people are evaluated in their employment contracts and performance management on this element? Do you think we'll ever get there? Like, is that a good mechanism to use? If a company says we genuinely actually want to change the tone at the same time, these are our values, this is what we advertise, and we've got these included in our value and our mission statements, it's in our policies, and now we want to make it work. And basically we're saying as an employee, you're aware of this, we've given you the education, we've given you the training, we give you the support to be a good manager. And now you have to put your money where your mouth is. You decide to work for us, and these are our values, and we're going to hold you to that, and we're going to do it through a performance management mechanism. Will it work? Do you think?
I'll say that.
Go for it.
So what you're saying, if I'm reading this right, is effectively saying, look, inclusion and diversity is effectively going to be a KPI in performance management. Yeah. Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors in the UK have already done this. And they've rolled that out as part of their performance management mechanisms. And they have those KPIs built into performance management, promotion, like annual performance review ratings and stuff like that. I mean, this is really interesting that they did. Are we there in Ireland? We're nowhere near that yet in Ireland. We are, how should I put this? We're such a monocultural country. It's like we actually haven't the most diverse workplaces to begin with. So I think that is a step that is currently beyond the capabilities of most Irish. And when I say Irish, I'm talking, I don't know what the American multinationals look like because their programs procedures are probably a lot different. But I think that that's a step that's beyond a lot of our Irish organizations right now. But they're making steps. We're just like, I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone. We're behind. We're as a country, we're behind in this space, but we're getting there. And the one grace about being a little bit behind is there's a bit of a second mover advantage insofar as that we can see what other countries have done and we can see what hasn't worked and what has worked. So yeah, I would love for that to be the case. I would love for that. I would love to see people saying, measuring, how should I put this? Yeah, I would love to see that.
You both said hope in different contexts already, and I think it comes up again in this, right? I think, as you say, we're taking steps, and the hope I have is I think by and large we want to take that step, and it's about the enabling companies and businesses, and whether that's 2 people working in a shop to 10 people looking in this, because you're right, there is a whole indigenous sector below that, very large organization where there's not the budgets or there's not the global examples or there's not the global policies to lean on. But I think I've got that hope that people want to get there because people just fundamentally want to work with each other and want everyone to be happy.
We do it in our organization. It's part of my KPIs. It's part of our leadership KPIs. There's a lot of follow through with it. So, nothing is ever perfect in that sense. So, and it's not, we don't do it perfectly either, but it is part of our 360 performances. It is listed as a value of the organization, and our values are brought through to our performance. And it doesn't go to the level of monitoring just yet because it's a whole, and we also work across many different cultures. So what works in one culture doesn't necessarily work in another culture, and we have to be very culturally sensitive. But we do actually have it as part of our, so we have to report on it every year, and I have to have a conversation with my team about it, and my manager has to have a conversation with me. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think Sarah is next, and then.
Right. It's not completely dissimilar, but it was like, I think it was mentioned that disclosure is the target or at the goal. And just in terms of say CSRD reporting, I think one of the requirements is it might be to disclosing how many people within your workforce, and then for example a disability, for example. I'm just wondering where it's kind of a fine line for employers. Say, how do you encourage people to disclose without pressurizing them? What is the solution? Is it KPIs? Does it come back to culture? Is there something else maybe positive discrimination, the recruitment process? So have you thoughts on?
So that was interesting. I think that's ESRS is one workforce. So I had great hopes for CSRD until yeah, it's in that context. My understanding is that they can disclose anonymously, and I think that's the answer. There is kind of like, look, guys, this is purely for CSRD statistical reporting purposes. This is not going to be seen by the organization. It does not go to performance manager or anything like that. That's the silo approach that has to be taken. As regards benchmarking and targets and stuff like that, it's kind of against what? In Ireland, it's kind of saying, okay, well, what are you meant to be targeting against in the context of neurodiversity? Is saying, what's the target? If you were to say it's meant to be representative of the population, we don't really have the most accurate figures for like what, you know, ADHD or autism or anything like that is in the population. So I think you might be on a bit of a slight kind of road to nowhere, if you know what I mean. I think organizations would be best to measure themselves against themselves. Here's where we were. Are we making progress? Is it the case that, we are finding ourselves with a more diverse population than last year? Great, the needle is moving in the right direction. I think that's probably where I find
because the ultimate thing you don't want to see is it's going down, right?
Yeah.
Because that is the absolute fail-safe to say that you are not an inclusive employer if you are seeing your percentages of people in different come back to silos, what are we going to call it, in different intersections. If you see those numbers reducing, then you've got a problem. And that's the piece that you need to measure yourselves against. I think anonymous is the way to go, because I think it's an essential statistic to have, because it is it's the only way to really measure the inclusiveness of your workplace, is to know the inclusiveness of your workforce.
Two questions.
Partly answered my question, which was about the categories or characteristics. I just wonder, how useful they are ultimately. If it's ultimately about, being an enlightened manager, leader, and being inclusive and taking the person, personally unique person before you define. Are the categories almost like the stabilizers before manager?
I think that's it.
That's a good way to put it.
Absolutely. We'd hope they would get redundant right at a point in time, but at the minute they're still necessary. And even more necessary, I think they're probably essential.
Yeah, and they're coming through legal protections as well. So I think back to your statistics piece and back to your compliance pieces, and if you're looking at kind of, so any of those kind of legal pieces that you're reporting on. But it's a really good question. I think your point about stabilizes actually, you do want to get to a stage where, it's an inclusive workforce without having to wear a t-shirt or without having to, like that's what you want to get to. But equally, I guess then you end up with, you've got the flip side when then everybody's the same. So where's the diversity piece gone? So where's that piece that, that makes us who we are? So, and I think, let's be honest, we're sitting up here, we're three, I'd say we're four white people sitting up having this conversation. So it's kind of easier to be able to talk about kind of invisible disabilities or intersections. I think, the whole piece around people of color, the discrimination that's faced. So, that whole thing about it was all being an enlightened employer that treats everybody the same. I think I might feel somewhat a little bit uncomfortable about that if it's basically looking at us as all the same when actually there's quite a lot of diversity among us. So I think that's where the diversity bit comes in, celebrating. I
On the basis.
Yeah.
I think labels at the end of the day are same as like tools. They can be used for good and bad purposes. So in that context, trying to ascertain, how diverse our organization is. I mean, at the end of the day, that is a classification on organization exercises. Labels are necessary in that context. But if they're being done with the pure intention of like, okay, because we're trying to move ourselves from here to here and trying to get ourselves to a more diverse workforce, fantastic. I would love for us all to get to a world where we're entirely blind to a person's characteristics and we could hire anyone, and their kind of, intersectional identities are entirely irrelevant. That's never going to happen. We're human. We're biased. We're flawed that way. It's trying to almost get ourselves to a place of, say, enlightenment. It sounds a bit, ridiculous, but where we can confront our own internal biases with logic and say, look, a label has sprung to my mind and my brain. I need to just ignore that and just deal with the person in front of me, And yeah, just being conscious that anytime we do use the label, just stepping back and saying, what's going on here? Why am I using this label? Is this for good in this moment? And if it's not, confront that and say, actually, do you know what? I need to push that to the side now and just, move forward.
Or is it even relevant at this moment?
Exactly. Is it relevant?
Yeah, is it even relevant? Is the label relevant to this conversation that I'm having?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Sorry, you wanted to ask a question.
Comment as well about the disclosure and from emails for change, and we just did the result of research around disclosure and how to share it. There are so many ways. There is this identification, and with that you can really measure as well the experience of people with intersectional identities. Like I used to work in tech, and for example, based on that, you could see, for example, that white males in Ireland has X experience, but for example, those from Indian background with a different experience. So it was bringing a lot of value. And I really believe in that. If you don't measure, you cannot change it. How as well we hold, for example, even the government accountable, no? Because we want to push so that the public service and the civil service, that they have at least 6% of people with disabilities employed. So if they don't disclose, if they don't measure, then they will not be accountable. And maybe my question would be like, how can we move away maybe from the fear of labeling ourselves and each other, and maybe the fear of language as well? Because, for example, disclosure is such a negative word itself. Clarifying to share as people, but it's not possible. They just don't like it because they want to improve. So again, just what you mentioned, you raise it from the good place, but how can we maybe move away from the fear? And also language, we are afraid to ask each other, like, what support you need, because I don't even know how to ask in the best. So I will just hide and not even ask. Like, do you have any perspective how we can move away from here and just admit that we don't know, but we still want to speak about things? And
So it's since they want to say
it's normalization, as in it's what I do, and like when I go into organizations, obviously what I'm saying, like, oh, get training, Merck, fantastic. No, it's you have to find some kernel within an organization to start a conversation around, whether that's internally with an advocate, someone stepping up and saying, I want to set up a committee, ERG, whatever it happens to be, just something around which a conversation can start, and then trying to find a way to communicate to people. It's like, particularly within an organization, if it's just person to person within an organization, it's like, look, guys, fear of having a conversation here is the killer. It's because I was a manager for a long time. I was neurodivergent, and I was afraid to say anything because I was kind of like, oh my God, what are they going to say to me? They won't believe me, or they will believe me and they say, well, we have to do the job. But then I was talking to managers and they were saying, geez, I don't want to have that conversation with someone. I'm going to end up in the WRC. I'm going to say the wrong thing. And it's just to be like, no, guys, just the big thing is you have to have the conversation, and you just have to find some way of grabbing it by the whatever in an organization and making a conversation happen where people are like, oh my God, this isn't scary. And the other aspect as well is, and you're saying about, whether it's disclosure, I would say it's not normalization of disclosure, it's the normalization of people asking for supports. Okay. I like, and it's whether someone being like, doesn't have to do anything to do with neurodivergence, neurodiversity, or anything like that, just being like, okay, I can ask for a typical one, an agenda before a meeting, that benefits everyone. I love having agendas before meetings. It removes the uncertainty. It's a big point for people who are autistic, is a low tolerance for uncertainty. But other people will find that beneficial as well. And just having it like very standard that people will just say, oh, can I ask for this? And then you end up in a situation where people feel safe. Oh, I know I can ask for that. And it's not going to trigger a big red flag to be like, oh, they asked for that, therefore they're ADHD. Oh my God, they've asked for, speech to text software, they're dyslexic. It's normalizing that process of asking for supports, because that's the end goal. The end goal, I think, is getting people comfortable asking for supports. Some people have to disclose in order to get to those supports, and that's part of the process, the legal protections. But I think the normalization of asking for supports, that's the magic.
And it's probably about having less rigid systems.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important piece, because, I mean, we talk about, you mentioned, Mark, there about the agenda not just being useful for you, it's useful for other people who want to have the agenda. I mean, if there's a culture of being able to ask for support, so how would that be different to a parent? Like we tend to pathologize disability in a different space. We're actually, how would that be different to a parent saying, look, I need to, I just actually can't come into work this week because of childcare or whatever, child's sick. So therefore I need to work from home. I mean, the permission to do that should be the same as the permission of someone to say, look, actually, really feeling kind of mental health perspective this week, I don't think I can get up out of bed in the morning and I might need to work later. So in a way, sometimes making it, back to your point, making it about one kind of label, like kind of, creates this kind of it being a disability support, but actually, back to your point around how we make it a much more inclusive workspace, that this is just more about how the system actually allows all of its employees to do their best.
Yeah, and it's pathologizing is the word you use really well, right? It's about making sure that it's part of the culture, that no identity or characteristic is a we can work together. It's not that this person has come to me, oh no, this is a weakness. This is something we have to deal with. No, it's not. It's not a weakness. It is just, this is who we are.
And I think, so Mark, you said this in the Accountancy Ireland article, when you acknowledge your weaknesses, it lets you focus then on your strengths then as well.
Listen, we're in a world where it's all about strong and it's great. I really welcome weakness and vulnerability. I think we can kind of adopt that more, because it's really against the current narrative at the moment, which is authoritarian, strong arms.
Two or four more?
Oh, yeah. So for me, it's more like just breaking everything that you say down. And for just the question I have is for the small, medium organization, just going back to the grassroots, how do you start implementing DRE in just a small, medium organization? How do you start that conversation? Do you go to HR? How do you start that? Outside the policies, whatever the policies are in your organization, but just implementing it, how do you start that?
I think the policies are important, right? As well as my role with EY, I'm actually the chair of a small arts organisation in Waterford. So I have some kind of experience at a smaller space as well. And the policies piece is important, that it's clear to people that this is what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. It's very difficult to set targets in a small organization, but it's not that difficult to make sure that you don't have bias in your hiring processes or in your customer service or in those things. And I think once you actually start to make it a part of your business as usual, that it grows. It's like it's you plant a small seed. You mightn't have HR to go to. You don't have those things that's very those organizations. So it's about making sure you plant the seed. And to the tone from the top point that like you've mentioned before, it's that the minute something happens, it gets called out. And it's just if it's seen as this is not acceptable and this is who we are, and then you put the policies in place as you go along. I think then it can't help but grow, because I don't know whether I'm maybe being overly hopeful about things, but it feels to me that, empathy and respect for each other is actually the natural state of being. And if we just foster that, that is what we will, that's who we are as people. And that it's almost like you have to teach children to discriminate. You have to teach children to see someone as other. And hopefully we can move away from that by planting that seed.
So, sorry, just the feedback I'm getting is all back to the culture.
Sure. Yeah.
I think as well, like you're talking about an SME, you could be talking about 10 people or, was it 250? Was it interesting? Yeah. So you can be all the way up to 250. It's like, that's wildly different. I think part, and I see it, see it in the neurodiversity space, and I saw a lot on, like you see a lot of online articles like, here's a key step, set up an ERG. It's like, you can't set up an ERG with a company that has 50 people. Like that's not going to work. That's not a valid thing. I think especially, and again in the neurodiversity space and non-visible disability space as well, just more generally, I think small companies think like, oh, look, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but we don't have anyone like that in our organization right now, And I think sometimes it's to say to them, it's like, I went with the statistics about this and I did it back of the envelope and I was like, look, Ireland has a very low employment rate for people with disabilities, like 32.6%. We're shocking. We're bottom of the league in Europe. And I was like, okay, if you take then the 50 to 20% general prevalence about neurodivergence in the population that people kind of take, that means that working the calculations out, if you have an organization that has more than 10 people, it is more likely than not you have a neurodivergent employee working for you. And I think putting that in front of people to be like, okay, here it is. How many people do we have working here? We have 20 people. Okay, do you think we don't have any neurodivergent people working here? Ooh, actually, it's more likely than not we do. Okay, so how do you think they feel right now? The fact that we don't seem to have an inclusive culture. What are we saying to people in this organization, particularly in small organizations, because you cannot afford to have turnover. You cannot afford to be incurring costs going out and trying to find new people. So it's kind of again going back to the point. I think if you get it right from the small, when you're small, fantastic, and you can let that culture build and grow. But how do you make them do it? Which is, I go back to business case. Like either you have leaders who are on board with this, and when you have a leader who's in on this, it's magical, great when they're on board with it. But if you have a leader who's not, it's like, okay, how do I get them on board? What's the business case here? Is it because there's the war for talent? Is it because that we need to retain people? Is it because we, whatever it is? And that lever that you need to pull, whether it's with HR, if there is a HR in a particular organization, or whether it's the leadership, you have to figure out that way to pull it. It could be the talent, it could be retention, it could be brand reputation, it could be any of the other, like just general, it'll just be good for business, whatever it is, and you have to, and that'll be unique to whatever particular organization you're in. But find that lever, pull it.
Okay. I think we'll probably be getting picked out soon.
Happy to take for sandwiches.
So yeah, no, maybe if I can just thank the panel, to Mary, Mark, and Jamie for joining us. And thanks also to Balance for helping to organise this. Special thanks to Karen from the Institute for all the work on the event and then all the work with Balance, and also to the Institute for hosting us. So thanks a lot.